All right, guys, let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I was actually going to be connecting with you guys about a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, I had an accident, but thank God I'm doing better. It was a pretty serious accident. I almost lost my life. Actually, I almost died. I could have died. And it was just by the hand of God that I am doing better, that I survived actually. I had a really bad fall. I fell about 3 meters from one of our buildings that we have for tables, and we're doing construction there, and unfortunately one of the pieces of the second floor collapsed and I fell to the ground. So I wasn't expecting the fall. So how I fell was pretty serious, because obviously I wasn't expecting the fall. But I'm here and I'm doing a lot better. I'm taking some medication to help with just like the vertigo, and sometimes I get a little dizzy from time to time. And I'm just learning how to kind of navigate and work more objectively and smarter as I'm still in recovering, and sometimes my mind gets I forget things, but I'm doing well, praise God. Today I want to, as I said before, I was planning on talking about this subject. I don't remember. I don't remember, and I don't remember Monday or Tuesday, so I don't know if I actually talked about this. So if I did talk about this, or if there was a meeting and I don't remember, then this is a review for you, as I'm not really sure what was talked about. So today we're going to be talking about communication, and I'm not sure if I already talked about this topic or not. So communication is so important when it comes to working in the marketplace. I would say not just within the marketplace, but in any sphere of society, whether it be in your marriage, whether it be, again, in the church or within the physical marketplace. Communication is essential for success. And this is something that I have been learning over time, of how to communicate, when to communicate, because just because you have something to say doesn't always mean it needs to be said right then, right now. Maybe you are still processing it. This is something like I myself have fallen in so many times, and if I could help you guys in your entrepreneurial journey, is that you would master the art of communication. Because if you don't know how to master the art of communication, unfortunately, you will find yourself kind of running backwards, maybe ruining relationships, and that's not something we want to do as individuals, specifically as God has called us to be ambassadors of the great word, to fulfill the Great Commission. But if you don't know how to communicate, how can you fulfill the Great Commission, right? Many times we are so focused on like what's being said, but we don't really focus on how to say it. And I think this is like something that myself, again, I'll use myself as an example, because I know you guys I don't want to say anything here to anybody like, oh, you did this or that. I'll use myself as an example, okay? I've fallen so many times in this area of communication, poor communication. And as a result of this, really suffered as a result of it. Lost a lot of relationships, burned a lot of bridges, maybe not a lot of bridges, but maybe burned bridges in my life that I really wish I would have never have done. And I can learn from it, right? I can't take back what I've maybe have done in the past, but I can learn from it and I can get better at it. And something that I have really focused on doing in my personal life is becoming a better communicator. Again, it's not really even the fact that if you're like very eloquent in your speech. Again, you see Moses, he didn't really know how to communicate, but he knew whom he had to communicate, when he had to communicate it. He was very dependent on God for all his direction, even though he wasn't the greatest at like speaking. And so I'm not really necessarily talking about your ability to speak, but I'm talking about your ability to communicate. Because again, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, and it's when you say it, and it's so important that we grow in this area. So today I want to talk about how we can master the art of communication. Just like we have to master many other arts, the art of discipline and the art of, compassion, the art of influence. Communication, in my personal opinion, is one of the pillars needed to be a successful entrepreneur, to be a kingdom-minded individual, to be successful in, again, every sphere of your life. So today we're going to be talking about specifically what is known as ACA communication. And I'll go through this, okay, of what ACA communication is. Basically, ACA communication is a very structured approach. And we're going to go through this of what ACA, so if you're taking notes, it's ACA, okay? It's an acronym. So Americans love to use acronyms. If you haven't figured that out already, they're always using acronyms, for everything. And it just makes it easier for, for communication purposes. But this is another acronym that we use in the English language. And so ACA stands for something. We're going to talk about this. And if you're taking notes, ACA stands for acknowledge, connect, and act. I'll say it again. Acknowledge, connect, and act. So this is really important because it's a really very simple framework. And I love building frameworks. This is something I love to do. There's some of you that have like very analytical minds as well. And I wouldn't say I'm the most analytical person, but something I really love to do is build frameworks, build systems, build ways of doing things. And that's one thing I think we need to really develop as kingdom entrepreneurs, that we are developing and building really strong and scalable frameworks. And so one of these frameworks in the area of communication and really developing in the art of communication is ACA framework. Now, this can be used. This is not something I invented. This is something that already exists. So it's not something that Ryan came up with, but this is something that's utilized in the marketplace all of the time. But today, I really want to put a biblical twist to this, because as a Christian organization, as a Christian business, I truly believe that the Bible gives us some very crucial and very important and very clear directions of how to be people that are really good in communication. So we can take this, let's say, I don't like to use the word secular, but we can take this type of study that is used within the marketplace, and we can apply it to the church. We can apply it to our families. We can apply it to pretty much any aspect of our life. And we're going to be looking at it from a biblical perspective because, again, we're a Christian company. And so this is a very important framework. And these three, you could call them pillars, are so essential because without acknowledgement, without connection, and without action, you really don't really go anywhere when it comes to communication. We will not probably be able to get through this whole study today, so this will probably be broken up into 2 parts or 3 parts. We'll see how it goes. But I want to go slow with this because I really believe we can all grow in being better communicators. And so one thing, if I can just tell you, or if I can give you some advice right off the bat, it's better for you just to go slow. Many times people get really irritated when people aren't going really fast with communication. I would prefer going slow in communication than going too quickly, saying something I don't really mean. I've used to be that way. I would vomit words. And I would always say what's on my mind. Oh, it's on my mind, I gotta say it. It's in my heart, I gotta say it. And so many times I erred in that because communication is an art. It's an art form. It takes time. It's like a painting. You can't put every color at one moment. You have to put your base color, and then you got to put your dark colors normally first, and then you build upon that and build brighter colors. But you got to let it dry. You got to give time for that. Many times we're not willing to let it sit. We're not willing to give it time, and we're just rushing. And so if I could really encourage you guys today is take your time. Take your time in communication. I think the older that we get, the slower we become in this area. And some people see that as a negative thing, but I really believe in being being, as the Bible says, slow to anger and quick to listen. I would say the same, like we'd be slow in our ability to like responding right away. We take time for these things to set. So just take your time, like slow it down a little bit. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to take time in teaching this. So I want us to look at the very first foundational principle. And again, this is acknowledge. Now, acknowledge is sometimes something seems so small, but it is so important. Because if you don't acknowledge within communication, you immediately disqualify yourself from even being heard. Many times we want people to listen to us, but we're not willing to take the time to acknowledge what is taking place. And so this is something I want to break down to you today. And I believe that through this biblical context, this is really going to help you as a Christian entrepreneur, as someone that has been set apart to do great things for God, not just within the marketplace, but in your home, in the church, and beyond. This can really help strengthen some areas in your life and really avoid any type of potential risks that you could have in not communicating properly. So let's talk about acknowledge. If someone can please write that in the comments. Acknowledge. That's the first one that we're going to be going to. And I'll open up my comments here so I can see what you guys are writing. Thank you. So the first one is acknowledge. All right. So like, what is the purpose of acknowledging? In its most simplest form, acknowledgement is recognizing the situation. I'll repeat that. Acknowledging is recognizing a situation, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, but you're taking the time to recognize the situation at hand. Or maybe it's emotions. So maybe it's not like a physical thing, but maybe it's like an internal thing. You're recognizing someone's emotions. Maybe it's an actual physical situation. Maybe something happened and you're acknowledging or you're recognizing that situation. That is acknowledging. Does that make sense? So when you recognize a situation or when you recognize emotions, it really helps this area of acknowledgement. But again, many times people don't take the time to recognize situations, to recognize emotions, or thirdly, they don't take the time to recognize other people's perspectives. They just want to immediately respond because it feels good to be heard. But that's not always a positive thing. I think, and I've taught this before in leadership, that leadership is servitude. So when you're going to communicate, you immediately have to put the person before yourself. That's what the Bible teaches, right? We're to serve others, to not be served. And so the same goes in regards to communication. But again, so many times we want to be heard. But here's the thing. If you take time to acknowledge or to recognize situations, to recognize emotions, and to recognize perspectives, you will be heard even better. Do you get that? Many times, again, we want to be heard, but we skip processes. We break down this framework and we think it's not important. And what happens is we disqualify ourselves from even being heard. When we take the time to recognize these situations and emotions and perspectives, I'll say it again, we qualify ourselves to be heard at the right moment, okay? And that takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of self-control. It takes a lot of brain power to shut your mouth, take a moment and recognize these three elements: situations, emotions, and perspective of the other people, okay? So this is basically the essence of what acknowledging is. Now, something that I think is really important when we're talking about acknowledgement or recognizing situations, recognizing emotions, and recognizing perspectives is something what I like to call, and what other people have called in any type of counseling, like counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, all these people, it's called active listening. And active listening is a very important part. And I can guarantee there's probably a few of you that are not even paying attention right now. And there are probably people that are going to watch this later that you're not going to pay attention because your phone rings or something happens, you got things that are going on, and that's normal. It's okay. And it happens because we as human beings, we can do multiple things at the same time, but when you're actively listening, what you're doing is you're focusing in on what's being said, and you're able to understand the data or take in the data and analyze the data. Just like I said, acknowledging is recognizing situations, recognizing emotions, recognizing perspectives. But if you're not an active listener, how can you recognize these things? If you're not even listening, if you're not even like paying attention to what's being said. You're like, oh, well, Ryan, English is not my first language. It's really hard. I could say the same thing about Portuguese. I could say that you could say the same thing about all these other languages, that other people speak. The universal language, I would believe, or the essence of successful communication in any type of language is just taking a moment and really focusing in on what the person is saying. You will learn. You can learn languages like this, easy. I never went to school for Portuguese. How I learned Portuguese is by listening. Javi, when I first moved to Brazil, Javi, I lived in Javi's house with his father and his mother and family. And I remember I suffered with this, and Javi he was super patient, so patient with me. I thank you, Javi. He's here in this call today for being so patient with me for for an entire year. He was so patient with me, and he would take the time to do this. He would acknowledge. I remember so many times he would acknowledge, he would see that I would need help. He all these things, the situations, emotions, perspective, he took that time to help me. And I'm really grateful for Javi because it was through him that I really learned Portuguese. Maybe not at that moment, but it opened my eyes to in the following years of really paying attention and being and being curious and being aware of the situations that I actually learn the language. And so you can learn languages. You just have to be an active listener. You have to be, so it's the same thing in any type of form of communication or languages. You have to be an active listener. And so what this means is, again, focusing in on what the person is saying. Now that person may not speak properly, or they may be super angry, or maybe they speak a different language and you're not really understanding. But when you're actively listening, you're focused on what the person is saying. You're tuned in, you're zoned in on what the person is saying. And one of those things is eye contact. And this is something that I noticed a lot in Brazil and also in Finland, is people do not make eye contact when they're talking. They'll kind of do this, and it happens a lot. And this is something that my father, it's very American culture, is look at me when I'm talking to you. Look me in the eyes when I am speaking to you. And this is something that really we could all learn, not just Brazil, not just Finland, but the world in general, is look at the person when you are talking to them. Have eye contact with the person. Don't look down. Don't look yeah, I'm listening, yeah. And you're now I do this from time to time when I'm on calls and I'm trying to multitask, but this is something that is not okay. We have to get better at this. This is why what I do is when someone's talking to me, I usually have my hands like this. Now, if I have my hands down, you probably know I'm typing or I'm trying to close something, but create a habit of either this or put your camera down where people can see you taking notes. I think it's something that would build a lot of connection with that person, specifically if it's a really important topic, right? But I think as we can grow in whether it's a very important topic or whether it's just a simple topic, we can begin to actively listen. So, making eye contact is active listening. Nodding, providing verbal affirmation. And this is something that I've noticed a lot with some people is when we're in a conversation, it's always important to say, okay, yeah, all right, that makes sense. Oh, okay, verbally affirming what that person is saying. If you're just quiet and you just stare at them, and you don't say anything, and you don't nod, and you're just this, like the person could assume that you don't either A, care, or you don't understand, or, like we always joke with like the Brazilians, like when they don't understand, they're like, doing this, like, do you really understand what I'm saying? Like verbally affirm what's taking place. I'm joking here, guys. Like everything that I'm saying in a joking manner, but it's funny because there's so many cultures here right now. You got Finnish people, you got Americans, you got Brazilians, you got all types of people here, and people that are watching this. Again, verbal communication is active listening is a really powerful tool, because regardless of what culture you're from, anybody can nod, anybody can have eye contact, anybody can provide verbal affirmation, regardless of what language is being spoken. So this is really important. I love what James 1:19 says. James 1:19 says this, and someone can please write that down. James chapter 1, verse 19. Check this out. My dear brothers and sisters, this is James teaching. He's talking to the church. He's talking to the body of Christ. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak, and even slower to become angry. So like, the Bible teaches us this principle right here of active listening, that we need to be quick to listen. See, when you're actively listening, you're not thinking about what to say next. And many times, specifically in Latin culture, and this is something I love about Finnish people, because they don't cut you off. Finnish people will not cut you off. They will let you finish what you're saying, and then they'll say, like, then you can respond. But Latin culture, they're always cutting each other off. And hey, I'm at fault at that as well. I've lived in Latin America for a while now, so it's something I've even had to grow in, of like cutting each other off. And it's not that you're trying to be rude, it's because you're passionate. You love, you want to be involved. It makes sense. I'm not diminishing any culture here. But still, when you're actively listening, you're actually allowing that person to speak, and you're not cutting them off. And so the Bible teaches us that we are to really take note of this. And actually, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what culture you're from. We all belong to the culture of heaven. And so the Bible teaches us to be slow to speak and quick to listen. It doesn't matter if you're Brazilian. It doesn't matter if you're American, North American. It doesn't matter if you're from Finland. It doesn't matter if you're from Zimbabwe. It doesn't matter if you're from Egypt. You have an obligation, if you're a believer, to be slow to speak and quick to listen. So active listening. The second thing I want to talk about is empathize. Have you guys ever heard of this word, empathize? Empathizing is a very, very important part in this first principle of acknowledge. When you empathize. So what does empathizing mean? What does it mean to empathize? Well, in its most simplest form, and I took note on this one, is basically it's expressing understanding. You're expressing that you understand, that you're trying to understand at least. That's what empathy is, right? Empathy is like, look, I may not agree with you, but I'm going to do my best to try to understand why you're speaking this way or why you're communicating this. Have you ever heard that phrase, like, just put yourself in other people's shoes, right? Walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Just try to put yourself in their position. Maybe something is happening right now and you're not getting the response you want. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe that person might be going through something really difficult? I mean, like, have you ever thought about that? And it was actually funny because at the moment, it wasn't the most funniest thing, but like a lot of people, when I had my accident and they knew I had an accident, like they were still treating me as though like everything was okay. Like, like, why didn't you respond back to me? I was like, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to like do my best here. And not that person or those people are not empathetic. It's sometimes we forget. We forget that maybe people are maybe going through something. And I'm the same way. Like sometimes, and I used to do this all the time, specifically to a lot of you. I pray I don't do it as much, but to a lot of you, I would say like, how come you didn't respond this time? And I didn't realize, wait, I live in Finland. Like I'm like, in Los Angeles, like 10-hour difference, right? In Brazil or, Omaha, in Brazil, it's not as much, like 6 hours, 5 hours. But like still, like had to stop doing that because it's like, wait, I live in a completely different time zone. I can't expect every single person to answer right when I send a message. And so I have to empathize, right? I have to take a breath and I have to put myself in other people's shoes. And so when you empathize, when you begin the process of empathizing, you're expressing understanding and your empathy, or you're putting yourself in that person's shoes and trying your best to understand how they feel, or their viewpoint, or their way of thinking. Okay, and so to do this, if you really want to really become better in this area of being more empathetic, the great thing you could say is, I understand how you feel. I'm trying to understand how you feel, or I could see how you would feel that way. This is like really good for even marriage, right? Like you can grow in this area of marriage. Like sometimes your wife says one thing and she really means that she's really meaning one thing, but you're taking it a different way and you're communicating something different, or you get offended, right? Or you get angry. Instead of getting angry or offended, why don't you just do your best to slow it down and empathize with the person? And so this is something that we can all grow in. Again, you can apply this to literally any area of your life. Now, we're specifically talking about the business world. We're talking about the marketplace. And so when you're acknowledging or practicing the art of acknowledging, empathizing is crucial for this to take place. Because when you make these statements as, I understand how you feel, I see where you're coming from, you disarm that person. You disarm the situation. You don't give power to false thinking. You don't give power to maybe chaotic situations. So I hope you guys are understanding this. And the last one, so we can finish up here today. So this is probably broken up into 2 or 3 parts. The last one is you have to validate. You have to validate. So we're talking about acknowledge here. Okay, this is the first letter of the acronym. Okay, of the ACA. So the first one is acknowledge. Within acknowledging, for us to really grow in this area of acknowledging, we have to do what, guys? We have to be active listeners. We have to empathize. And number 3, we have to validate. Validation is so important when it comes to this principle of acknowledging. And so I want you, and there's one verse here that for the last principle that I just gave you. I love it. It says Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. So the Bible teaches us you have to be empathetic. It doesn't matter if it's not your personality. You belong to the kingdom of heaven. So therefore, if the Bible teaches us to rejoice with those who are rejoicing, then rejoice. If the Bible teaches us to mourn with those who mourn, then mourn. It's interesting. It doesn't say rejoice with those who mourn. It doesn't say mourn with those who rejoice. It doesn't say that. It says rejoice with those who rejoice. So that means you have to be happy when other people are walking in success or when they're excited. And I was watching one of these reality TV shows. We're watching it right now, of like realtor, like they're sellers. They sell houses, like high expensive houses, high-end houses in New York. And it was interesting. I was watching this lady who's a very successful lady. She didn't get chosen for a specific thing. And it's interesting because when this other lady came in, who's her friend apparently, she gave the news that she had been selected. And this lady immediately gets like offended and is like, why were you chosen? And it's so interesting because I'm like, that's so funny. We see that happen so many times within the church. We see that happen so many times within the Christian world. It's like people don't get excited, but when other people are successful, we like immediately judge or we get angry. And that's like not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches, it says, rejoice with those who rejoice. And it also says mourn with those who mourn. Meaning there is, as in Ecclesiastes, it teaches that there's a season for everything. There's a season for joy and there's a season for mourning. So when other people are mourning, it's not a time for you to be like, hey, just be happy. Just walk by faith. And it's like, no, like it's okay to cry with your friend if they're crying. Now, obviously you don't want to get stuck in that moment of just like, oh, it's going to be, for the rest of your life, mourning and sadness. No, like, we are also to walk by faith, but at that moment, we're to empathize with the person and put ourselves in their situation. Doing this will help you open up the door for communication to take place. Does that kind of make sense, guys? That we wouldn't just rush to trying to resolve situations. Like, oh, I'm a problem solver, so I'm going to solve this problem. No, take a moment. Be a human being. Have a heart. Use your mind. Use your spirit. Use the direction of the Holy Spirit. Use what the Bible teaches us and slow down. And take a moment and put yourself in that person, so empathize with that person. And lastly, sorry to go long here, is validate. So when you validate, I'll be quick with this one. When you validate, you are acknowledging the other person's thoughts and feelings. It's very similar to empathizing. But when you validate, you are really letting that person know that you do care and that you understand what they're saying. You're doing your best to understand, and you're validating their emotions. I think so many people get frustrated so many times because they don't feel validated. But if you validate other people's emotions, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, but if you validate the situation, if you validate that like their feelings are real, that their emotions are real, you disarm that person. You disarm the situation. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean you're agreeing with the person. So you have to understand the difference. Because many times, like, well, if I validate, then I'm agreeing with what they are, and I don't agree with it. That's not what validation is. Validation doesn't mean you agree with them, but rather you recognize that their perspective is legitimate. You can't just say, oh, well, they're not right, and that they have to change. It doesn't matter. They have feelings. They have their emotions. They have their beliefs. Is it right? I don't know. Maybe it is right. Sometimes maybe it's not right. But when you validate, again, you're not agreeing with them, but what you're doing is you're recognizing that their perspective is a real perspective. Like, they're actually another human being next to you that has emotions, that has beliefs, that has viewpoints. So this is really important. And so Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, and I'm gonna type this on the line here. I hope you're liking this. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 says, "Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." Wow, being a Christian is hard. Yeah, that's why it says that the road to hell is very wide and the road to heaven is very narrow. Very few people will get through that gate. Very few people will actually be what the Bible calls them to be, because it's so easy to be carnal. It's so easy to just do what your flesh feels like, and I don't need to care. I want people to know what I say, what I think, blah, 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 blah. We're always doing that, right? But the Bible says you have to look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. I love the fact that Philippians says this. I'm so glad that the Apostle Paul wrote this. I'm so glad that he wrote these words right here, because it's a reminder to me that I have to look not only to my own interests, but also to the interests of others. That is the success in communication. And if you can learn this, if you can learn to be a person that is actively listening and when you're communicating with other people, to be empathetic, and also to validate those emotions or that conversation, I guarantee you that this first principle will work wonders for your life. It's going to be a tremendous tool for your life. So many people are so talented. I don't know how many conversations I would have with my wife in the past, how many conversations I would have with my wife, how many conversations I would have with pastors who were over me and who led me, or people of like leadership, and they would always say, "Ryan, what's your problem? Like, what? You're ruining it. You have so much talent. You have so many gifts, but you disqualify yourself Every single time you choose not to be active listening, not to be empathetic, or not to validate, Ryan changed. And I'm so glad. I'm not perfect. I'm so glad I made the choice to change. And you can make the choice today too. You can start today to become a better communicator by first applying this principle, acknowledge. Next week, we're going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to go into these other two principles. Those two principles are going to be connect and act. Connect and act. So today, I pray that this was beneficial to your life. If it's not beneficial to your life, then hey, you got it. Keep going. But I think everybody could learn, and I think everybody could grow in their area of communication. I will be the first one to say that I need to grow every single day in the area of communication. In doing so, you truly become an ambassador of Christ and you become a true marketplace missionary. Learn how to communicate. Amen.